Okay, hi everyone. So this is just a quick video on, a quick breakdown of a topic that's related to international history theme 2 for H2 history students. I will be working on another GP video in a bit, and based on the poll, and for all of you that polled, thank you for polling. I really appreciate it. There is a greater demand for content-based stuff. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do today. Just a little bit of a breakdown of a topic that for the J1s this year, you will learn it next year. And for the J2s, I honestly highly doubt that this will come out for your A levels in a couple of weeks' time, but because it came out last year. But hey, it doesn't hurt because the context here, matters a lot for the topic of the problems of the global economy later on. So yeah, okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. So for the global economy, all right, this topic in itself, uh, it is actually, for the benefit of the J1s, is split into two parts. One is the development of the global economy itself between 1945 to 2000. And the second topic would be the rise of Japan and China. So for the J2s this year in 2023 who are going off for their exams in a couple of weeks' time, their syllabus is very different from yours because they are learning instead about South Korea and Taiwan. Yeah, but for the first topic, it's still more or less the same. And for the topic of the development of the global economy, broadly speaking, you can split it into two separate timelines. So the first one being the growth itself, which occurred around this period, all right, or rather, this is the timeline for it, 45 to 71, technically not 73. And then the problems that came afterwards, all right, more commonly known as the crisis decades, that will be from 71 to the 80s, although for the Western, or rather the developed economies, they did experience a resurgence. Nevertheless, we are not really going too much into that today. And instead, we'll do a quick breakdown of the main concepts. So you can expect a series of videos on this, explaining each factor more or less in greater detail. All right. And then, yeah, of course, hopefully, if you find this helpful and you're looking for, H2 history tuition, give us a call or drop us a text because who calls nowadays? Yeah. And yeah, so okay, I should have prefaced this, all right. Sorry if I seem very low energy, cause it's been a tiring half a year, yeah, so to speak, and we haven't actually um gone off for our break for the year yet, so we are just still kind of chugging along. And future videos, definitely we would try and see how we can improve the production values and all that. But at the moment, yeah, we just do it guerrilla style, make do. Okay, hopefully over time this changes, and we might even look to properly, using our YouTube profile as a platform as well. Okay, so growth of global economy. Essentially, what you want to understand here is that the causal factors for this would be four factors. All right, broadly speaking, four factors, and there will be USA, Western Europe, and Japan. The international system, I'll elaborate that a little bit more later on, and the multinational corporations. So for this video, I will expound mainly on MNCs, all right? Because for me personally, I like to go with explanations of the least important factors first, so we can delve deeper into it. And yeah, so among these four factors, right, just to spoil you a little bit, spoiler alert, basically, the most important one is USA, followed by the international system. And then Western Europe and Japan will be the third most important. And then multinational corporations or MNCs will be the least important, even though they definitely, in the grand scheme of things, still play a very key role. So when you try and understand H2 history content, the easiest way, to do it is really base it on concepts. So in other words, you have four factors here. We have already ranked their importance. And then now what you need to understand is their individual contributions in terms of causing the growth of the global economy. So the growth of the global economy from 45 to 1971 is also known as the Golden Age. Why is it called the Golden Age? Because, how do I put this? It was a period of unseen growth, okay, and basically growth in world trade volumes. It's a bit hard for us to imagine, obviously, even for me, because, as a millennial, I was only born in the early 90s. And even then, as I was growing up, yes, I witnessed firsthand the impacts of the GAC, unfortunately. Not GAC, sorry, the GFC, the global financial crisis. But the periods of growth that we have witnessed since, maybe, let's say we just wind the clocks back 20 years. So in the past 20 years, just imagine, okay, Singapore has developed this much, for instance, all right? But it's a bit hard to imagine just how small this level of growth is compared to the golden age of capitalism, let alone the golden age of capitalism, even if we compare it to the days of our, of the previous generation. So your parents, basically, Gen Xers, or the baby boomers, or the pioneer generation, so on and so forth. Because if we just imagine it in our contemporary context, Singapore has, seen in the past 20 years, rapid developments in terms of technology, and we are somewhat used to it, but I imagine for many of you who are, subscribed to the Telegram channel and, who watch or listen to this video here, you would have grown up your whole life, more or less, knowing about the existence of smartphones. And it'll be hard for you to imagine a life before that. So the point I'm trying to make here is that compared to what we went through, in terms of like our generations, so you guys, the Zoomers or the Gen Alphas, if you are young enough, and for myself, a millennial, compared to what, our forefathers went through in this period. Okay, not our forefathers, but rather the people who existed in that period in those nations. Yes, it's a bit hard to imagine, but you are looking essentially from an economic statistical point of view, right? Roughly about 2 digits economic real GDP growth. Okay. And for the J1s, you all would learn more about this in macroecons, essentially. Yeah. So coming back to the first factor of the multinational corporations, in conceptually speaking, right, multinational corporations, how they compelled the growth of the global economy was simply through, FDIs, foreign direct investments. So if I imagine that, many schools will have already started touching on, macroeconomic concepts before you're broke off for your promos, but how MNCs compelled the growth of the global economy was essentially through investing in subsidiaries in other countries. So how that worked essentially was that, imagine if, let's say, we look at Singapore again, right? So it's a little bit more relatable for you guys and easier to imagine. Some of the big MNCs that you see here, depending on which sector, but you can look at, for instance, food. Food-wise, you are looking at big MNCs like, if you are talking about direct B2C, that means business to consumer chains, essentially. It can be things like, Mickey D's, McDonald's, or, let's say, all your different Japanese food stalls, basically. Or, if you're talking about foodstuffs, like packaged food or processed food items, right? Let's say cup noodles, Nissin is is another MNC, or Pokka, right? So on and so forth. Okay. So when we talk about foreign direct investments, right? Essentially all these MNCs, they would, depending on the laws of the countries, but the gist of it is that they would go into the economy, and then they would, through whatever paperwork or bureaucracy that they need to navigate, they'll establish a subsidiary there. Okay. And what that means is that it's technically a local company, but with ties or directly owned by that MNC itself. So, for example, we just talked about McDonald's. I'm not sure if any of you guys have actually called for a McDonald's delivery through, the app itself, like the McDonald's app. I'm not talking about other food apps like, Grab or whatever. If you do it through there, all right, and I remember the last time I did this was, wow, years ago. But this particular thing stuck out to me. I think that was in 2017. When the app itself navigated to the payment page, the page where you have to key in the 6-digit OTP, right, that they send you if you are paying by credit card, then you will see that the payment is not technically made out to McDonald's. The payment will be made out to this company called Han Bao Bao Private Limited. Yeah. So what that means is that that company itself is the main franchisee of the McDonald's name. Okay. And McDonald's would provide them with, all the necessary IP things, intellectual property things, like, let's say, hey, this is how the recipe is done. Hey, this is how we want our operations to go. This is how you should train your, employees, right? And this is how you, most importantly, how you maintain quality control. So if we contrast that to, let's say, a more modern example, right? Pretty sure you guys will have heard of this, but hang on. So a more modern example would be something like this. Okay, in comparison to, let's say, Mr. Beast Burger, how it works is that they essentially set up a virtual store. That means they would come into a partnership in very simple terms, right? Of course, the nuances of each individual contract is different. They'll come into a partnership with, let's say, restaurants all over the country, all right? And then they would supply them with the recipe, but that's it. So if customers went into that store itself, or ordered delivery through things like DoorDash or whatever, okay, then they can choose to purchase a Mr. Beast burger, in which case, again, depending on the individual arrangement, the revenue split will go between that restaurant itself and Mr. Beast burger lah. But the problem is that, in contrast to McDonald's, right, this one doesn't have that same level of quality control. So the reason why I bring up the Mr. Beast Burger example is to highlight how MNCs essentially operate if you are talking about franchising, right? That means you pay a particular licensing fee to the MNC itself and you set up a store in their name selling their products, all right? And you would see many of these examples here, like let's say the Apple stores in along Orchard Road and at Marina Bay, things like that lah. So when MNC set up all these subsidiaries, right, all over the world, okay, a couple of things usually happens. The first one, the sharper ones among y'all would have realized it by now, but the first one essentially is that they will transfer skills and knowledge. So all the processes that I talked about earlier is one example, I guess, of how skills and knowledge are transferred. So, again, going back to the example of McDonald's, right? Mickey D's, how to make the burger, how to manage the franchise itself, so on and so forth. That's how they offer all those particular skills and knowledge. That's number one. Number two, how do they drive development? They create jobs. Okay, they create jobs. Because if MNCs want to expand overseas, aside from setting up the subsidiaries, okay, and once again, depending on the laws of the nation, like let's say in the case of Singapore, if I remember my numbers correctly, 1 in 4 must be a local. So 1 in 4 employees must be a local Singaporean. And in setting up all these subsidiaries, they will need to hire employees, of course, and then that's where they would, create jobs. And then for those that take econs, right, essentially when we talk about development, what happens is, or the multiplier effect, what happens is that, when someone takes a job, their income increases, they have more disposable income, they spend it on goods and services that will ameliorate their standards of living. And even, depending on how much they earn, even things like luxury goods, right? And then once they spend that disposable income, that money then goes to all your businesses as revenue, all right? And then if let's say you're talking about an SME, the business owner's income will increase. And then likewise, they'll spend it on things that will improve their standards of living and so on and so on and so forth. And that's how the multiplier effect happens. So that's the second way that MNCs drove the global economic development. But most importantly, right, how MNCs in the context of H2 history drove global growth and the global development was really through this concept. Where is it? No, these are my long form notes, by the way. If you are interested in having this, you all can just drop me a text. But yeah, where is it? No. Okay, I can't find it here, but essentially the gist of it is through this concept called intra-firm trading. So what does that mean? That means, right, for instance, again, going back to that Mickey D's example, okay, right here, the idea is to gain access to all their different recipes, right? So, some of your, as you all know, McDonald's also does a targeted form of marketing. That means they may create products that may not be available in different parts of the world. For instance, in Singapore, the McSpicy is actually quite unique to us and to the Asian region as a whole. If you go to USA, you wouldn't be able to buy that product because they can't handle the spice. Yeah. So okay, so again, to do a little bit of a interdisciplinary thing here, This is how you can see how all your different MNCs appeal to different markets, right? And how that may help you in econs, for instance, so product differentiation. And then in the context of GP, that is appealing to the different cultural contexts of each society. But in the context of H2 history, we are mainly interested in the fact that to gain access to global recipes like the Big Mac, for instance, okay? Basically, what your MNCs and the headquarters of the MNC itself, let's say in USA, right? They have to sell the intellectual property rights to their subsidiaries overseas. Now, for the MNC itself, it may just seem like a left pocket to right pocket situation. The analogy being that let's say you have your wallet, and it has maybe $20 inside. So it goes from your left to your right pocket. Not much of a difference. It's just the location only. But in the context of the global economy, what that does is that it increases the global trade volumes because a transaction is made. And as we know, right, gross domestic product, GDP, or depending on how you want to measure it, GNP, although nowadays we don't really use GNP anymore, is a measurement of all transactions. So even a simple transaction like this, right, would see an uptick in global trade volumes. So that's how MNCs drove the global economic development and how it eventually would begin to tie a lot of these economies together. So I don't know if you all follow me, my channel on TikTok, but we did do a very brief analysis there. But then again, this provides more context lah. So when all your different economies get tied closely together, then cooperation by right increases and intra-firm trading increases, right? So to use another analogy to really help you understand here, let's say Apple Store at Marina Bay, right? That spherical building thingy. Okay. If let's say they want to sell the latest iPhone there, I don't know, iPhone 3021, whatever the number is now, okay? It isn't being produced here, obviously, right? One of its manufacturers is in China, with unfortunately a lot of labor conditions issues, but whatever, let's not get into that. And the intellectual property and the design of it all is in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, right? On the east or west coast, east coast of USA. So if we want to sell the iPhone here, we need to import the manufactured products from the manufacturers, whereby the manufacturing process is at its last stage lah. So your packaging and distribution, everything. And that would be, again, one of them would be in China, right? And then if they want to have the rights to access the intellectual property of all these things, they need to purchase it from USA. So all these imports still count as a form of global trade. And that's how, from 1945 to 1971, how the MNC played such an important role in driving global economic development. Because again, it's a bit hard for us to imagine in our highly globalized world, but prior to 1945, I mean, setting aside the nearly half a century of wars and Great Depression and all that stuff that occurred from 1911 until 1945. Before that, the MNCs was really quite an unheard of thing because most economies aim instead to be self-sufficient. And I mean, arguably the earliest forms of MNCs would be things like your British East India Company or the Dutch VOC, all those people that Jack Sparrow was fighting against in Pirates of the Caribbean. But even then, that was ultimately meant to serve the main colonial masters themselves. So the modern day MNC, as we know it, really only properly developed in the 20th century. And, again, that's how they brought global economic growth. So again, the concept here is they acted as the conduits of your developed economies, right? Because a lot of these MNCs came from USA and Japan. Specifically, things like this one right here, McDonald's, Hertz, the ketchup company, all your Japanese car brands like Toyota, Mitsubishi, and all that, basically. And acting as the agents, I guess, of economic policy or expansion into the global market by all these developed countries. And what they do is they would, by creating subsidiaries all over the world, they transfer skills and knowledge, creating jobs that led to growth. They tied all these economies closer together by building trade ties, through all the subsidiaries. And finally, they drove global trade volumes through intra-firm trading. Okay, so that's how, this particular factor of the MNCs work in precipitating the global economic growth. So yeah, that's it for this one. I'll try and film more stuff by next week, and hope this was useful for you. And if this was useful, invite your friends along to join our Telegram channel. And yeah, if you're interested in a trial lesson for H2 history tuition, please feel free to drop me a text. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, I'll see you all next time.